I'm Kevin O'Neill, and this is an introduction to reflections on the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, called the Pentateuch, which simply means 5 books, or else, as the Jews call it, the Torah, which means instruction. So it's the 5 books of instruction. We'll draw upon ancient and modern Jewish sources in order to highlight some very interesting truths in these 5 books. Now, why have we chosen these 5 books? It's a good question. Why do we choose them? Well, first of all, we felt that there was a wealth of material on, obviously, the Gospels. There's a wealth of study material on the Gospels, on the epistles of Paul, on the book of Revelation, on the Psalms, the prophets in the Old Testament, and so on. So we thought it was a good idea to focus on these 5 books, particularly as the Jews have a great high regard for the Torah. It would be difficult to overemphasize the respect that they have for these books. In fact, if you go to a synagogue and you see when they bring the Torah scrolls out of the ark, which is at the front of the synagogue, as they bring it around, the men go forward with their tzitzit, their prayer shawl and the fringes, and they touch the Torah with the fringes, and they kiss them. And other people bow as it goes by, and just a tremendous sense of honor and respect. Why should this be? Because we owe everything to that Torah. We owe everything to the revelation of God at Sinai, and on through, of course, to the coming of Jesus, the Messiah. Now, for over 3,000 years, yes, 3,000 years, the Jews have been studying these 5 books. 3,000 years of study, of meditation, of reflection, and even of debate, and even maybe you could say arguing, except it's not arguing. The rabbis debate hotly these things, and they come up with some amazing insights which Christians can benefit from. 3,000 years, just consider that. Now, for 2,000 years, in other words, since the fall of the temple in Jerusalem in AD 70, the synagogues have been going through the readings from Genesis through to Deuteronomy, the whole 5 books, every year. They begin at the beginning of the year, go through, and then at the end of the year, they finish it with Deuteronomy, and then they begin again, Genesis again. They've done this, so we can say they've done this 2,000 times, 2,000 cycles. I've been visiting a synagogue for just over 10 years now, so I've gone through 10 of those 2,000 cycles, and I can tell you that I've been so tremendously blessed. I can't tell you how much. So tremendously blessed by the Jewish insights into the Torah, and I would like to share that with you. Now, we may ask, so what? So what? The Jews find it very important. So what? What does that mean for Christians? Well, Paul, the apostle, taught that we've got a root-branch relationship with the Jewish people, with Judaism, in fact. And if I may, I'll just read some scriptures here, which, by the way, I went to a Bible study some time ago, and the fellow was talking on Romans, doing a study on Romans. And he got through to chapter 8, and then he stopped. So this went on for a period of weeks, and we got to chapter 8 and we finished. And I said to him, when are we going to do chapter 9, 10, 11 and so on? Which, as you will probably know, is all about the inclusion of the Jews in the gospel, the salvation of the Jewish people, the ultimate salvation of Israel. And he said, well, we're going to have a break now and we'll do it in the future sometime. Well, guess what? He never did it. And there's a lot of churches which avoid Romans 9, 10 and 11 because they don't like to accept the fact, for some reason, they find it difficult to accept that God has not given up on the Jewish people and that the Jewish people will ultimately be saved. So hallelujah. So I'm just going to read out of chapter 11, Romans, and just look at this here. Beginning at verse 11, I say then, Paul says, have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid. Very strong words. But rather through their fall, salvation is come unto the Gentiles to provoke them to jealousy. Now, if the fall of them be the riches of the world, and the diminishing of them the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? So there's a reason why they've fallen away for a period of time, for a temporary time. It's so that we may be saved. And it goes on to say in verse 15, for if the casting away of the Jewish people be the reconciling of the world, what shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead? Resurrection. For if the first fruit be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches be broken off, and thou, being a wild olive tree, that's us Gentiles, we're the wild olive tree, we were grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the root and fatness of the olive tree. Boast not against the branches, boast not against Judaism, boast not against the Jews. But if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee. So the root supports us, we don't support the root. We owe the root everything, in fact. Thou wilt say then, the branches were broken off, that I might be grafted in. Well, because of unbelief they were broken off, and thou standest by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear. And so on. It talks about this. And then verse 24, he goes on to say this, for if thou wert cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, we Gentiles cut from a wild olive tree, and wert grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, Judaism, the root, how much more shall these, who are the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree once again? For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery. This is a mystery. Lest ye should be wise in your own conceit, that blindness in part is happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles come in. And then I'll miss that next part, and it finishes off, this whole chapter finishes off. Why somebody would find this difficult to preach, I don't know. Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments, and his ways past finding out. For who hath known the mind of the Lord, or who hath been his counsellor? Or who hath first given to him, and it shall be recompensed unto him again? For of him, and through him, and to him are all things, to whom be glory forever and ever. Amen. So what we're saying is the Jewish people, Judaism is the root that supports Christianity. In fact, our whole society is a Judeo-Christian society. We owe everything, civilization and everything good that we've got, to the Torah, to the Jewish people who received that Torah at Mount Sinai, and to the Messiah who was born through them. Jesus was a Jew of Jews, born to the house of David, born the tribe of Judah. We owe everything to the Jewish people. So that's one of the reasons why I want to study these 5 books, because the Jews hold them in high regard. So what can we learn from the Jewish people? Now, what will our method be? Our method will be, we'll use the Jewish system. Now, in Judaism, in the synagogue, this is Chumash, which simply means 5. The 5 books are in here, and they're divided into a total of 54 sections. That's from Genesis to Deuteronomy, and they read these 54 sections every Sabbath day, one of these sections every Sabbath day throughout the year, as I explained earlier. We'll use that same system. We'll take one of the sidras, that's what they're called, sidras or sections. We'll take one of the sections, beginning with Genesis, and we'll, just for 10 minutes, we'll look at it and we'll find some relevant Jewish insight into that passage of Scripture. We'll think about it, we'll discuss it, and then we'll see Jesus in that observation, in that insight. We'll link it up with the life of Jesus, the Jew of Jews. We'll link it up with him, and then we'll look at how it's relevant to us. This should take each time not too much more than 10 minutes, round about 10 minutes, sometimes under, sometimes over. What's the purposes of this whole study? The purpose is, 1, to strengthen our Jewish roots, to strengthen our hold on the Jewish roots. Secondly, to expand our thinking, because did you know that Jewish people, the Hebrew mind, the Middle Eastern mind, thinks differently from ours? And this is important. And we need to learn a little bit more how to think in a Jewish way if we're to understand the Jewish scriptures and the Jewish Messiah. Because some of the things Jesus said can only really be fully understood if we think as a Jew would think about it. So we'll look into these things, and it'll become more clear as we go on, I hope. And thirdly, most important of all, we're doing this study to reveal Jesus. It's not to get lost in some study, some Jewish study, some Hebrew study. As good as that is, Jesus is the ultimate, and that's what we want. We want Jesus to be glorified. We want Jesus to be revealed. Think of this as a train journey, a railway journey. Think of it as a journey with, let's say, 54 stations. And we all join together and we get on this train, and you can go to one station if you want and just admire the view. You can get out there and you can admire the view, and you can return again if you want to. Or you can go to the second station, or you can go to the third. In other words, each one of these studies that we're going to do, each 10-minute study, stands on its own. So you don't have to commit yourself to saying, oh, we got to do the whole 54. You can do 1, you can do 2, you can do 10, you can do them all. It's a journey that we're taking together. And the other thing is, we are fellow travellers. I'm not here to teach. We're not here sort of to lord it over anybody. We're together, we're discovering wonderful things in the scriptures together. And with that in mind, if you wanted to put comments beneath these videos, reflections that you've had yourself, insights that you've got through listening to them, questions that you might have, please feel free to put them down there, and we'll try and answer them. We'll try and respond in some way to them, because, you know, together we're discovering the riches of Christ. Everybody is welcome, Christian, non-Christian, undecided, whoever you are. You're more than welcome. We want you to see us here as your friends and people who would love to help you to see Jesus more clearly. So bless you. Amen.